Howdy, I'm Tom of Tom's Mechanical Videography, and this here is Ol Mossy, my 1985 Mercedes-Benz 300 CD inline 5-cylinder Turbodiesel with a 7223 automatic transmission in it, regrettably. Now, this old girl sat for 16 years outside my uncle's tractor shed until I came along and got my grubby mitts on it, started breaking things and unbreaking other things. Now, before I had started this project, I had never owned a diesel, I had never driven a diesel, I didn't even know what diesel fuel smelled like, and it took me 3 months before I finally learned what real diesel fuel smells like, because that's not what was in the fuel tank, and more on that later. Like I said, this is my first diesel, it's my first revival, and she has been a rabbit hole. She is full of holes, I'm a hole, and I'm a whole lot of foolish. This is the first thing other than a lawnmower I've ever revived. And yeah, she's been a rabbit hole. She has fought me every step of the way. Like I like to say, this thing is passive aggressive. You know, it's not obviously fighting you, but it's doing little things that eat away at your self-confidence and your motivation every single step of the way, but it never fully dissuades you. It's just trying to get you to give up. I think the thing is possessed. And more on that later. Let's see if I burn alive. I don't know what that is, but that's a noise. Ooh, good God, that is not diesel anymore. Alright. Oh, it tried. It tried right there. I think it'll do. That's too much. Batteries. Yep, that's it for the battery. Oh, there was two there. Have 2 cylinders. We got fucking Cheechage, my man. Sounds like a fucking freight train, but she's a-going. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We'll shut her down. Uh-oh, she's a dieselin'. Just don't do that. Send it. Purrs like a kitten. Alright. See if it's got more gears. Oh, speedometer doesn't work. Doing about 20. Ooh, I felt a gear. We're in 2nd gear now. Good God, that looks like a cyst. That is demonically organic. Yeah, water pump is done. I'm sure one of the passageways done. I'm gonna feed her the beans. Just watch the radiator. She's just sucking water through them veins. That radiator is junk. Just a smidge of chooch. So I'm just gonna start feeding her the beans. Let's see how responsive she is. Not very, but it is also a turboed 5-cylinder diesel. But she does get up there. Hope we make some progress. Is something dripping over here? As you can see, it's crystal clear, absolutely perfect. Still smells like burnt oil or burnt rubber all the time. Oh, hey, that's new. That thing is really gone. I need to stop driving it. It immediately rounded off the second I put it in there. I didn't even put like 30 foot-pounds of force on there and the thing's stripped. So now I've got a set of big old vice grips on it and I'm turning it as hard as I can and I'm probably putting a good... Alright, will this video be DMCA'd? Let us find out. That's a good sound. Well, I think I might have fucked up, guys. So the story of Ol Mossy is that this car was imported into Delaware. I think it was bought by a company and used as a company car for a couple of years, then sold to somebody else in Delaware, driven for a couple more years, then shipped down south here to Charleston, bought by a lawyer, driven around for a couple of years, sold, bought by somebody else, driven around for a couple of years, sold, and then one of my cousins purchased this thing when she was in college. She drove it around up at college, and then when she came back, she bought something else, sold it to her dad. Her dad turned around, sold it to my uncle. My uncle turned around and gave it to his middle child as a replacement graduation gift, because he had originally gotten her a 1977 Lincoln Continental town car with all the trim levels that had been kept in immaculate condition by a local guy, and she hated it because that thing's like driving a dump truck. It's like 30 foot long and 10 foot wide. It is, and flat. It is a massive car. So she hated that thing, so he bought this from his cousin, gave it to her as a replacement. She drove it around for a little bit until the AC quit and the starter started giving her trouble, and she said, "I'm done driving these broken cars you keep giving me," and bought something else. So then she gave it back to him, and then he gave it to his youngest, and he drove it around for a couple of years, actually took his driver's test on it, until he bought himself a truck, as every young man around here does, and gave it back to my uncle. And then my uncle used it as a farm car for a while until he eventually traded it in a barter deal along with an old truck to a good friend of his in exchange for him building a dock at his daughter's house that she was building. Now the fella that he traded it to is the kind of guy who will drive 500 miles to another state to pick up something for free and then haul it all the way back, pull it apart for scraps, or sell it as is for a profit. That's the kind of guy he is. If you drive by any one of his properties, there's about 14 cars sitting on them. And for some reason, he came and he got the truck, and he never got the Mercedes. I don't know why. It sat there for 16 years, as evidenced by the 2004 license plate. So this car was sitting next to my uncle's tractor shed for 16 years, was in, reasonable mechanical order. According to my uncle and his son, nothing wrong with it. It ran just fine. And for whatever reason, he never came and got it. And it sat there for 16 years until I came by and got my grubby mitts on it. And this car has fought me as much as it possibly can without discouraging me. Like I said, I had never worked on a diesel before this, and first thing I had to do was get a battery, and I was not going to buy a brand new battery for this thing. And eventually what I did was I preemptively replaced the battery in my daily, which takes a Group 34, and then managed to stuff a Group 34 into a Group 49 spot. And a Group 49 is very wide and fairly short, and a Group 34 is pretty square and pretty tall, and the poles are swapped on it. So I had the thing jammed in here at a 30-degree angle underneath the hood, and I had to put a battery cover over the top of it, because if it fell back, it would arc out on the hood, or on the hood sill, and if you close the hood, it would arc out on the hood. So that was fun, but I had a battery. And then the next thing I had to do was the fuel system, because I'm here in Charleston, and what we have down here is diesel algae. So this thing had been sitting for 16 years out here in Charleston, subtropical climate, and she was chock full of something that can only be described in appearance as halfway between transmission fluid and cheerwine, and smelled somewhere between green olive juice and Hoppy's No. 9 gun solvent. And I've still got all of that in buckets over here, and I don't know why I still have all of that in buckets over here. I honestly don't know. I think I was going to try and put it back in the thing, or I might use it for an oil carrier for herbicide. I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully I don't put it back in this thing. So after I pumped 5 gallons of that out of there with a transfer pump, because this thing was buried in the ground, there ain't no way I'm getting under there and draining the fuel tank. Then I bled the entire fuel pump system up there. Let me pop the hood real quick. So anyway, then I had to pop the hood and get under here and bleed the whole fuel system. And the first time I popped this hood, I snapped this guy clean off. So I had to get a chunk of rusty metal that I just found laying in the ground in the next to the tractor shed, which I think I still have in here buried somewhere. It's in here somewhere, but anyway, I'll put a picture up. And so I had to fish that through the hood latch so I could pull the hood open, and that stayed in there for a couple of months until I bought another one of these. And did eventually get a new battery because I'm not that dumb. I like being able to shut the hood. This thing is very annoying to use because you have to... It'll close on its own, but it won't stay up on its own. Well, it will, but then you get a crosswind coming, and then this 40-pound hood comes down and then brains you. So, bled all the fuel system, all that jazz, and could not get her to start. Even with a liberal application of consent and a can directly into the exposed turbine prop, would not touch off. But she spun over just fine, and that was very discouraging. Until I eventually figured out that even though I was letting the glow plugs run full cycle, light would turn on, buzzer would run, and then 5 seconds later it'd cut off. Well, it turns out that the glow plugs on this thing take 20 seconds to do one cycle. So over like the course of a month where I was off and on trying this, you know, once every, you know, couple of days or so, trying to turn over a couple of times and trying not to kill the battery, I never let the thing get a single glow plug cycle, because for whatever reason it takes 4 times as long as the light in the cab would indicate. Yeah, after I figured that out and I got actual glow plug, you know, cycles going on it, and, you know, more liberal application of consent in a can directly into the exposed turbine prop, we got touch off. We had confirmed cheachage. There was a confirmed cheachage event. And I was able to get the thing running on about 4 cylinders, and then after feeding it the onions for a bit, it started running on all 5, and it shook like an epileptic, but it ran. It ran. And after that, I put some wind in the tires and drove it the mile home here to my grandparents' house, where it has sat ever since. Regrettably, she is not on the road yet, even though I have been beaten on this thing for about a year. It was a year since I first started poking at it, pretty much like to the day. And I've got her up on homemade wheel cribs on cinder blocks, and I've got her on wheel ramps jammed up with chainsaw wedges, felling wedges, because I like to live dangerously, and I'm cheap. And I'd fire her up for you, but currently there's no coolant in the system and no oil in the transmission, because I have been hunting a bugaboo in the cooling system this entire time, and I'll get to that in a second. But the next thing I did was tires, and these are 4 brand used dump tires that I got. Went to the local scrapyard, found a 1997 Toyota Camry that has the same size rims, 195/70 R14s. Can't find 14-inch rims anywhere around where I live, 14-inch tires. So anyway, after taking a donut spare that had so little tread and so much PSI in it that it can only be described as an inner tube, and jamming that on top of the jagged slag rock and miscellaneous bolt sling there in the scrapyard underneath the wheel so I could break the lug nuts with the lug wrench I found laying in the scrapyard, and then hucking a torque converter at all the wheels, I was able to get all of the wheels off of that Camry, bought a tire changer, and put all of these myself, and I'm happy to say that I think it only cost me like $25 per tire. Nice. But after that, I started hunting the cooling system, and this thing can only be described as possessed. When I popped this thermostat cover off, it was demonically organic in there. It can only be described as looking like something, a cross between a pepperoni and a fruitcake. It was chunks of red and like clear and green, and it was horrifying. And this entire cooling system is like that. I have run 2 bottles of flush and about 60-70 gallons of well water through this thing to try and clean the cooling system, and it still comes out rusty. And I've replaced the water pump, because I had no flow through the water pump before. I could take that hose off and nothing would come out. The first time I drove it, it overheated. It almost redlined before I even drove the mile back here. I have replaced the water pump, which as you can see is already rusting. Thank you, Gates. And I've got a radiator sitting in the back. But since Mercedes employs only the finest German engineers, in order to change your radiator, you also have to drain your transmission, because the transmission cooler is integrated into the radiator. And I got this close to changing it last week before it finally dawned on me that one of the transmission cooler soft lines, both pivots were seized. So I'm going to have to cut that to get it off. And I'm not going to take that hose off until I have a replacement here. So I have been delayed another 2 weeks. That has been how everything has been on this dang car. So anyway, when you drain the transmission, I just want to show you this because it's horrifying. I want you to look at this drain bolt. See that? You see how it's about 3/16 of an inch tall? Notice how there's no hex on it? Well, I want you to think about this. So you're designing a transmission drain bolt for the undercarriage of a low-riding car. What do you make the transmission drain bolt out of? If you guessed mild steel, and if you guess that the way that you remove it is with a 5mm hex that's only 3/16 of an inch deep, congratulations, you've just been hired by Mercedes-Benz. I put about 15 foot-pounds of torque on that in the dang Allen strip. I think it's only supposed to be torqued to like 10 foot-pounds. So I don't know what they were thinking, but after liberal use of a propane torch and vice grips, that finally came out. And I think there was probably half as much transmission fluid in there as there was supposed to be, so that's great. There's a transmission leak somewhere. And yeah, we're working on that still. Before I replaced the radiator, I finally got her to the point where at idle, with the ambient temperature being 40 degrees, which is not normal in Charleston, let's say that. It's usually 100. I finally got her to the point where at idle she would sit just below 100 degrees Celsius. If you really hammered on the accelerator, you could get it to drop to 90 degrees Celsius. The operating temp for this thing is 80, by the way. And yeah, tried to replace the thermostat as well. The new thermostat I got was defective, and it opened at like 192 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's supposed to open at 176. So luckily the old one was stainless, and I cleaned it up and just stuck that right back in with a new gasket. But yeah, radiator is junk. If you get this thing up to about 4,000 RPM, you can watch the water come out of the fins of the radiator, like just bubble up and fly out into the fan and get exploded. And somehow it holds pressure. Somehow the radiator holds pressure. It's crazy. Oh man. But I guess I should explain why this is called Ol Mossy. The reason why she is called Ol Mossy is because when I found this thing, there was 2 inches of water in the floorboards. And those are factory shag carpets. This is moss. There was moss growing on every single carpet, up every little bit of carpet, and I have not removed it. I actually just put these carpets back in last week. After a whole year of hunting a leak that has been dumping water into this floorboard, I finally gave up and just drilled holes in the floor pan. Because after a year of trying, I can't make it stop. I can't. Lord, somebody help me. It's driving me insane. You see this? You see all this spray foam and shop towel jammed back in here? There is a hole that's about 3 inches wide and 6 inches long right here between the firewall and the inner fender that I could just stick my arm down in. I theoretically could stick my arm down in and like grab the back of the emergency brake pedal. But I'd never get my arm back because it's like a Chinese finger trap. And yeah, so all the water from the hood sill and down the windshield all funnels right into that corner and would just go straight down onto the floor pan. But I knew that since this held water, the floor pan was in great shape. And I immediately ruined that because I put about a pint of diesel in a container in there after I was draining the fuel tank, just to sit it in there for a minute. And I'll be danged if that radioactive diesel didn't eat through the container, spill just like a couple ounces of diesel onto the floor pan, and then dissolve the entire undercoating into this black sludge, and then seep underneath the undercoating like penetrating oil, dissolving the adhesion, and then the whole undercoating just came up, and now the whole thing's rusting. So fantastic. Good job, Tom. I've tried everything, spray foam, I made a little sill, I did everything, I cleaned up all the channels, everything. This, because of how rusty this was, this hood arm broke off, which is really annoying because it does not stay up unless you put it all the way like this, and then it blows over. And yeah, I've just given up at this point, you know. And this has this whole Rube Goldberg system. It comes down here and drains this way and down here and down this way and out that way, and then through this little doohickey up here into the wheel well. And yeah, it's just needlessly complicated because it's German. And yeah, I've bled the brakes. Brakes still work somehow. And yeah, a couple other miscellaneous things. You see my my fuse box. Both the screws on the fuse box were totally seized. This one snapped off all the way at the bottom, at the nut that's inside of there, and this one snapped off right here. So what I had to do was drill a hole into the old bolt and nut in there, and then tap it for 8 and 32, and just, you know, take a homemade wing nut and make my own hand turn, because that's what I'm gonna do. This thing is missing all of its mounts, so it just rattles around like this, which is fun. And I guess I should probably explain the painter's tape. That's because I was hunting around for the leak originally before I realized it was that massive hole up there. And yeah, I just painted off all the weather stripping because there's basically no weather stripping left. And I have caulked the sunroof in place because I know that doesn't work. You know, there's holes back here at the corner of all the windows, big hole right there, big hole over here. So it's just painter's taped up at the moment because I don't know what I'm doing. You know, doors are rotten. That's what the interior leather looks like. You know, very nice, very... Somehow the seat still reclines. Everything is like that. It's just terrible and horrible. And, yeah, ain't nothing left to it. Only gauge that worked when I got it was the thermostat, by some miracle, because that's the only one I really needed to work. Oil pressure gauge don't work. Fuel gauge didn't work till I pulled it out and massaged it. I have drained the fuel tank, cleaned the fuel strainer. It is chock full of algae. It's just covered in brown sludge, so that'll fight me for the rest of the time that I own this car. Speedometer works, sort of. It makes a very loud clicking noise. And clock don't work. Blower works sometimes it doesn't. The heater core is plugged solid. And, yeah, she's a mess. And my plan is not to daily drive this. I want this for going to town rig. And as an emergency backup car for whenever that Jeep decides to blow up again for like the 7th time. Because I've replaced every single thing on that car. So I have driven her around. I've driven around a fair amount. Probably put maybe 7 miles on it. That's about it. Just because it overheats. If you drive it for any more than about 3 minutes, it starts to gets creeping above red line. So you have to park it. So I have no idea how good the transmission is, but I have gotten it to grab third gear with like being 3 quarts low in the transmission fluid. Oh, and one more thing. Here's the hood release. It's not supposed to be a piece of T-iron. That snapped off last week. Not only did the ferrule snap off of the cable, then the handle just snapped off of the wall. It's laying over here. So that happened last week. That was very fun. And yeah, I've just made this thing, which is a piece of T-iron with a little bit of steel on the end that's clamped onto the end of the cable that I've crimped an aluminum ferrule onto. And that mostly sort of works, but all the bolts over here need to be adjusted. Because you got to pull on that thing with about 100 pounds of force to get the thing to open. So hopefully I don't break that again. Shout out to Kevin and Derek. Thank you guys for putting out those videos. You were my inspiration for me to spend all of my time and money on this pile of rust. Thank you. I love not having time or money anymore. And yeah. That's Ol Mossy. This is my submission to Deboss Garage's 2021 International Car Show. And yeah, I'm Tom of Tom's Mechanical Videography. This is Ol Mossy. I don't know what else to say. What do you want from me? All right, bye. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, she was covered in lichen when I found her, in some sort of mold or some other lichen or something. Anyway, it was growing all over the place. I'm late for a meeting right now, so I'm driving really fast. I'm trying not to run into anything, but yeah, I just want to make sure I got that in the video. All right, bye again.